We began tonight with water. Let's return to it now. We've already heard from Benedict Collins and spoken to the Minister, David Clark. This is the report of Stage 2 of the Havelock North Water Inquiry. Now, Havelock North was a large event, covered at length, of course, too big to ignore. But the dirty reality is that tens of thousands of New Zealanders get sick from unsafe drinking water each year, and most of it goes totally unreported. And the extraordinary reality is that the Ministry of Health's drinking water team is about a third of the size of the Ministry of Health's communications team. Standards exist, but in real terms, they are simply not meaningfully enforced. Now, the report recommends replacing the ministry's drinking water team with a separate drinking water regulator. John Pfahlert is the CEO of Water New Zealand, which represents approximately 1,500 water users in almost all sectors of the country. I spoke to him shortly after the report was released.
Well, I think it shows that there's been a pretty woeful performance on behalf of the current regulator, the Ministry of Health. Of course, the inquiry is recommending some fairly substantial changes in that area. But clearly there's a whole range of things that we at the industry level will also need to make changes to, and there are 51 recommendations for how we are to go about that.
And what are the most important ones, do you think?
Well, clearly the establishment of an independent water regulator is something that we support. We think that the function should be taken out of the Ministry of Health and put with a standalone organisation where there's absolutely no confusion about trading off the amount of effort that you put into doing that versus any other health initiative.
Sorry to interrupt, but in order to have an independent regulator, you need them to have some teeth, don't you? What sort of teeth would you want them to have?
Well, they could start with the current drinking water standards and simply enforce them. I mean, clearly there's going to be some work to be done to make sure that the current standards are amended and are fit for purpose, so there's clearly some changes that need to be made to them. And that's a matter for careful consideration by an expert panel. But the fact remains is that the current regulator, the Ministry of Health, has not undertaken a prosecution with the existing drinking water standards since they were installed 10 years ago.
I just want to come in there. You say that we could start with the enforcement of drinking water standards. That might, in normal circumstances, be an almost facetious remark. But actually, the point you're making is that they are simply not enforced at all.
No, they're not. So it's a bit like speeding while driving a motor car. If you know that there's not a snowball's chance that you're ever going to get prosecuted or pulled over, there's no disincentive to behaving badly.
And there seems to be sort of complicity in this from the highest levels. On January 25th, do you recall the exchange between the Mayor of Tasman, Mr. Kempthorne, and the Associate Minister of Health in 2012?
Well, I've heard of it. I don't know the details.
So he wrote for clarity around drinking water standards and what they had to do. And the advice he received was simply including reference to water safety improvements in a long-term plan was considered to meet all the practical steps required. Now, that's just taking the piss, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's no doubt, and the inquiry goes into great length on this, that the current performance of the Ministry of Health in terms of regulation has been woeful. Pretty inept, I think, was the word they used. At the end of the day, the standards were there. They were regarded when they were passed in 2007 as world's best practice. So I don't think the bureaucrats and officials and the experts had any doubt that they were fit for purpose at the time. They may well have drifted a bit in the 10 years since. But given that they were pretty good of a pretty good standard back then, simply enforcing them right now would be a good start. But I don't think the inquiry has much confidence that the ministry is actually capable of doing that.
Well, they don't have a team to do it with. They don't have a team. I mean, their water team is under-resourced and structured ineffectively. I'm reading directly from the report here. And their leadership, although obviously the Director General has just gone, but their leadership has been described as a complete failure.
Yeah, I think that's fair comment, and in essence, we're going to need to completely change the way we look at the way we regulate water, which is why I think that the inquiry's recommendation that the government immediately create an establishment unit to get one up and running is almost certainly the correct approach.
People have been warning us, haven't they? Michael Joy, for example, who was you know, fairly vilified, vigorously vilified by senior politicians in the last government, have been telling us actually that our water standards and the policing of them have been simply inadequate. Why does it take until a report like this for us all to sit up, take notice and say, yes, something has to be done?
Well, I think it gets down to complacency. You know, if you don't have a significant adverse event, then community suppliers, district and city councils can be lulled into a sense of false security. They get positive E. coli readings one day, and a week later they test the water again and find that it's all clear. The assumption is that it must have been a false positive. There are all sorts of reasons that water suppliers could be lulled into a sense of thinking, well, everything's predominantly okay, we don't need to worry too much. But what the Havelock North incident, I think, shows is that when it goes wrong really badly, with the potential to, you know, infect or kill very substantial numbers of the population. And, you know, the economic costs on Havelock North might have been, say, $1 million to put in place a chlorination facility in advance. But after the fact, I understand that it's cost them already in excess of $20 million. So, you know, you're talking much greater costs to do nothing than actually to get it right. And, you know, I think we have a social obligation to the community to make sure that drinking water, you know, we are a first world country. We should be providing water of the very highest quality.
John Pfahlert, CEO of Water NZ.